That's me sitting in the first concept car that SAIC has shown to the world. This is the Yez, and it's something entirely different than we've ever seen before in an automobile. Instead of polluting the environment, it takes pollution from the environment and completely redefines the relationship between the motor vehicle and nature. Powered electrically by solar, artificial photosynthesis, wind power, and the absorption and conversion of carbon dioxide, the Yez is the first automobile, concept or otherwise, that's ever been conceived to have a negative carbon footprint. The Yez was built for the World Expo 2010 as a showcase of the technologies that are being investigated to create the ideal urban vehicle for Shanghai in the year 2030. Now, by that time, Shanghai is going to be just one of 220 megacities with a population greater than 1 million people in China. China already has 120 cities that large. Now, by comparison, Europe has a measly 35 and America has 9. Cities like the Shanghai of 2030 are going to demand some very special criteria for the cars that travel their streets. SAIC is not a name you're going to see at your local dealership just yet, but last year, its largest car maker slipped quietly into the top 10 auto manufacturers in the world. It will almost certainly be followed by a string of other Chinese car makers like FAW and Dongfeng, just as China's government-owned banks now dominate the top 10 list of the world's largest banks. Until now, SAIC has been the partner of Volkswagen and General Motors in their joint ventures into China, but it's now expanding elsewhere. It's acquired a string of car, bus, construction, machinery and motorcycle companies in China. It recently acquired the British mark MG, and it's now opening design centres in the UK. It just acquired 50% of General Motors India. That's the other developing country with more than 1 billion people who don't already own cars. India's vehicle ownership ratios are the same that they were in America in 1912. China's levels are at the same America's were in 1923. Now, SAIC has committed $1 billion for building brand names that it owns. Native Chinese brands account for less than 1 in 3 sedans sold in China, and for less than 1 in 4 of the increasingly popular SUV market. SAIC plans on fixing that problem. So the Yez is just the start of something huge, and the background to it all is just as interesting as the Yez itself. China is fast reclaiming its crown as the most powerful nation on earth, and the scale of almost everything here is an order of magnitude greater than anything the world has ever seen before. 50 years ago, America produced more than 80% of the world's cars. China was still learning from the Russians how to make its first powered vehicle. The Jifang truck was a crude copy of the Russian ZIL, which was pretty agricultural in its own right. That's Chairman Mao there at the launch of the project. For a country that had led the world in technology for 1,000 years, this was a late and inauspicious start to the age of personal transportation in China, but the beginning of a fairy tale technological resurgence. Even as global production grew, America still produced half the world's cars until the mid-60s, when Germany and Japan began to produce in volume. And other production facilities around the world started to grow in number and sophistication and output in the intervening 40 years. But America still leads the world when we pick it up from 1999. Let's graph this out so you can see what I'm talking about. Each of these lines represents a single country's automotive production as a percentage of global sales. That top green line is America, just below it's Japan, and the thick red line down the bottom is China. So over the last 10 years, you can watch America's share declining fairly rapidly, and even Japan on a steady downward trend, as China's market share grows relentlessly. Then, the global financial crisis hits at the end of 2008. American market share dive bombs as cash-positive China makes an enormous surge. This is a major and fundamental change in where the world's cars are being manufactured. China has simultaneously become both the biggest producer and the biggest consumer of automobiles in the world. Everyone expected China to take the lead that America's held since automobiles were invented, but it's fair to say that nobody thought it had happened so soon. And China's surge isn't about to stop here. A number of social and economic factors are going to push China's auto consumption and production to much greater heights in the next few decades. So when you talk about cars, China is now the number one player. When you talk about the future of cars, this is where it's going to happen. What's happening in China today will fundamentally change the kind of cars we'll all be driving. For China's citizens, the future looks very promising indeed. In the last 30 years, the quality of life for more than 1 billion people has improved dramatically, from a rural economy much as it has been for centuries to a booming manufacturing economy. In a single generation, most of China has modernised from medieval to mobile phone. The society's evolved 500 years in the space of 50. More than 250 million people have been removed from abject poverty, and by almost any measure, life has improved enormously. The Chinese people are now more optimistic about the future than any other country, by a massive margin. The rate of change has been so great that it seems to have broken the resistance to change that we experience in other societies. As a result, China is quickly surpassing other countries in terms of its adoption of new technology. There's now more mobile phones in use in China than existed in the whole world just 10 years ago. The cities of China are full of young Chinese digital natives who are already using the mobile internet at greater rates than their counterparts in America and Europe. They're accessing the net from their phone more than their laptop. They're early adopters, and thanks to the single-child policy, they're more affluent than previous generations with an incredible thirst for status and brand names. China's already the second largest luxury goods market in the world. The world is moving to cities. In 1900, just 2% of the world's population lived in cities. In 2007, 50% of the world lived in cities, and by 2050, it's going to be more than 70%. China is urbanising faster than any country in history. In the last 3 decades, its urban population has grown from 170 million to 600 million, and it's currently growing by 40,000 citizens every day. This is McKinsey's 2009 report, China's Urban Billion, and it's pretty much compulsory reading in understanding the adversities faced by the Chinese government and the opportunities that are going to result. You can download it free on the web. The scale of urban construction in China's regional cities is difficult to comprehend until you see it. These shots were taken in 10 minutes from the back of a taxi in Qingdao earlier this week. The same process is going on in hundreds of cities across China. Hundreds! Hundreds of skyscrapers are all under construction at once. A dozen a day are getting completed at present. And for the next decade, half the world's new floor space is being built in China to house this colossal influx of human beings. And just like everywhere else in the world, as the Chinese have become more urbanised, more sophisticated and more wealthy, they don't want to be getting around on bikes and scooters. They want to own cars. In 2030, China's going to have 220 megacities. That's double the number that it now has, and the government recognises that powering those cars with oil is simply unsustainable. There's not enough oil, it's going to cost too much, and it'll create more pollution in a country that already seems choked with smog. So by necessity, China is now incentivising electric mobility on a scale far beyond any other government in the world. There's more than 50 environmentally friendly cars that qualify for a subsidy already in China. The Toyota Prius, which is the champion of clean emissions in America, doesn't even qualify for a subsidy in China because its 1.8 litre engine is considered too large. China owns SAIC. It might be run like a publicly owned car company, but it will play out the Chinese government's green agenda, and the $1 billion earmarked for development of its new brands will all go towards the development of electric and fuel cell and supercapacitor vehicles, all networked to each other and to the infrastructure so that the transport system in total can be intelligent and efficient. SAIC is destined to be a brand with impeccable green credentials, smart personal transport beyond anything we've ever seen from an auto company or a forward-thinking government to date. Starting a new brand can have its advantages when you have this much money and momentum. The World Expo currently underway in Shanghai is a showcase of sustainable technologies in every way. The site of the Expo is vast. It's twice the size of Monaco. 20 times the size of the last World Expo. It's just too big to walk. SAIC was given the monumental task of ferrying 500,000 people a day around the vast Expo site with the strict provision that there be zero local emissions. So it had to build a futuristic public transport system of the year 2030 for 500,000 daily commuters, and it had to build it today. SAIC used the opportunity to trial all the logical new technologies like supercapacitor buses, more than 300 of them, and fuel cell buses in a fleet that numbers more than 1,000 vehicles. If you haven't heard of a supercapacitor, it's a device that can rapidly accumulate an electric charge, such as what you get from regenerative braking. But its biggest advantage is that it can also quickly release that charge and provide the peak power levels which existing batteries can't deliver. This rapid recharge and discharge makes it ideal for a bus which needs heavy initial power to get underway, and it has short and frequent cycles. Supercapacitors are expensive, but they'll get cheaper, and they have a lifespan of millions of charge-discharge cycles, so they'll definitely play a role in the future of high-performance electric vehicles. SAIC and Volvo, who are their partners in the supercapacitor buses, will have a lot of knowledge about how they perform in the real world before the 6-month Expo is over. So Expo 2010 has electric passenger vehicles, electric street cleaners, delivery vehicles, even electric trikes to clean up emergency spills across the vast Expo site, all continuously operational in punishing real-world conditions. Running such a massive fleet of clean energy vehicles and solving real-world problems on the fly will give SAIC a massive competitive edge. This is the biggest and most advanced trial of sustainable transport technology ever conducted, and the company doing it is just about to invest a further $1 billion developing its own brands and super clean autos. SAIC and General Motors have the preeminent automotive presence at Expo 2010. Their massive pavilion has the most comprehensive and convincing view of the future on display at the entire Expo. GM China's ENV concept will be the subject of a major Gizmag feature article in the near future, and the granularity and detail in GM China's vision is extraordinary. There's a short feature film being shown in the pavilion. It might look like science fiction, but it's not. I've seen some of the research behind it, and it is a fully formed vision produced by GM China, which you're seeing glimpses of in this video, and there'll be even more in the ENV video, so don't miss it because it's visually and intellectually stunning. If you visit the Expo, it, along with China's big vision, is something that you should not miss. China's World Expo is the biggest World Expo ever. With the exception of wars, it's the biggest single event the world has ever seen. China spent $60 billion on the Expo. It's 50% bigger than the Beijing Olympics, and it runs 4 times longer. What's more, the point of this Expo seems to have been almost entirely missed by the world's media. Previous World Expos have been about showcasing the future to the rest of the world, but Expo 2010 is about the Chinese government promising the future to the Chinese people. It's aimed internally, not externally. 95% of the 70 million visitors are China's own people. China is changing so fast that the government has produced a massive 3D real-world roadmap designed to engender patriotism and pride. The message here is, here's how far we've come in the last few decades, and here's where we'll be in another few decades, so get on board.
今天新闻联播的主要内容：庆祝中华人民共和国成立40周年大会。27岁的中国选手徐凯峰获得了金牌。1997年7月1日，香港回归。第一艘载人航天实验飞船在酒泉卫星发射。广东省的深圳市示范经济特区。第29届奥林匹克运动会在北京举行。我国第一座跨海公路大桥正式通车。三峡水利枢纽工程实现大江节流。上海证券交易所正式成立，政府电子对撞机首次对撞成功。刘翔打破了119米栏世界纪录。
That message is everywhere. There's a number of common threads throughout all Chinese-produced communication at the Expo in particular, but right across China in general. Better city, better life is the main theme. Sustainability is common across the communication agenda, and so is we're all in this together. And the SAIC brand and 51% SAIC-owned GM brand will be the ones foremost in the minds of the 70 million Chinese who visit Expo 2010. This will be the mobility brand that they associate with the environmentally sustainable message of the Expo and its undoubted promise of a better life for China in the future. So let's summarise. Here's a company with a green footprint, effectively starting out from scratch to build a new brand with modern brand values in a booming economy with $1 billion, plus the resources of one of the biggest car companies in the world behind it, and a mandate from the government, which also owns it, to make green cars for a market that's already the biggest in the world and that's expanding at a truly frightening rate. It's not hard to project what's going to happen. We're going to see top quality, sustainable personal transport being mass produced, and it'll happen on a scale far larger than we've ever seen with gas vehicles. It's an extraordinary scenario, and the Yez is the first SAIC concept we've seen, so it's definitely worth a close look. 4 Yezes were constructed for the Expo. One lives permanently at the Chinese pavilion, one sits downstairs at the General Motors China SAIC pavilion, and 2 have shared live performance duties for 10 minutes every half an hour, every day since the 1st of May. They don't actually photosynthesise, but they are electric, and SAIC let me have a little tootle around the confined backstage area of the pavilion. They've apparently run like clockwork ever since they were built, with the lightweight race car shape offering 10 hours of driving per charge. The idea behind the Yez concept is that the production version will eventually photosynthesise, absorbing carbon dioxide from surrounding air and emitting oxygen back into the atmosphere. Among the many futuristic aspects of the Yez, which is Chinese for leaf by the way, is a roof that incorporates solar panels and wheels that incorporate small wind turbines to harvest energy from the turbulence and wind flow while you're driving. Artificial photosynthesis has proven elusive to date, but there's every indication it will be a commercial reality within 2 decades. Strangely, in the original write-up of the Yez that we did a few months ago, we noted that although photosynthesis, solar and wind power were likely to be far more viable 20 years from now, we didn't share SAIC's optimism that the car would work during both sunny and overcast days, particularly in beautiful not-so-sunny Shanghai, where I've been for the last fortnight, and I've only glimpsed the sun a few times. But spending a fair amount of time at the SAIC General Motors Pavilion and in a specialist seminar entitled Connecting the Virtual Superhighway allowed me to see quite a few different presentations on future plans for the companies, and the limited view presented of the Yez in earlier press releases is actually far broader than has been previously disclosed. For instance, the Yez could quite possibly live in your apartment with you. This glimpse from one of the featured movies at the SAIC GM stand shows a Yez owner who lives in a high-rise apartment walk over to the edge of his apartment, step into his Yez, and begin descending to the road below. Another glimpse of the Yez from one of the presentations shows it being charged in a parking station, so SAIC obviously has more in store for keeping the Yez full of beans than it has shared with us at this point in time. Like many other vehicles which collect energy from the environment, the Yez is intended to become another node on the electricity grid and share its energy for other purposes too, seemingly by the same interface. There were some other glimpses of the Yez's functionality too throughout the displays, movies and live shows, which made it seem so much more than we'd previously been made aware of. The biggest aspect of the Yez which hasn't been made public just yet are the plans to include it in the networked vehicle concept, just as the ENV is designed to do. This means it will have sensors and GPS functionality, and it'll be capable of running in an autonomous mode, of platooning with other cars, or driving you home if you've had too much to drink, or driving your children to school, or taking granny to the shops, going and picking up the babysitter so you can have a night on the town. It's clearly been envisioned as an autonomous vehicle from the outset, just like the ENV. It's all part of the ecosystem being envisioned for China by its biggest car companies, which are majority owned by the Chinese government. It means it won't have accidents and... Look, watch the Gizmag website for the General Motors China ENV video which we're producing. It should be up by the end of July and it's an absolute ripper. It fully explains General Motors' vision for a networked future on the roads. And it'll give a great deal more idea of the functionality of the ENV and indeed the Yez, as they all come from the same company. My money is now on SAIC becoming the world's biggest car company.